So let's start. Today is, as I told you, the last lecture. So we will complete the syllabus, what we had planned from the beginning, and then go on to some revision, and we can discuss areas that were not clear, right? And you can ask me any questions. So we get all the since I've sent all the lecture slides that we've done so far. So have all of them ready. We'll go through them together and I'll sort of highlight the areas that you can focus more for the exam. Right? How does that sound? So we're in the final lap of FinTech. So today we will be covering the technologies that are driving FinTech and Sri Lanka's FinTech journey and how FinTech can be promoted, right? So you might recall this diagram from previous lectures, from not the last lecture, the lecture before that. So this was the types of FinTech, right? So then we went into detail of discussing the outcomes of FinTech, which is crowdfunding platforms, mobile payments, robo advisories, InsurTech, RegTech. There are so many more. These are some of the main areas, right? So this is not an exhaustive list. By no means, neither side of this diagram is exhaustive, right? Because FinTech is a very broad and it's a very expansive concept. In the sense, a lot of things can be called FinTech as we find out more innovations that can be developed using technology for financial services, right? So if someone tells you something other than this as FinTech, that doesn't mean that that person is wrong or this is wrong, right? So these are just exhaustive lists. These are not exhaustive lists. These are basically, for now, what are the main areas, right? So if you take the technologies, right? Now, what we have at the bottom are the services, the applications of it, right? The outcomes. So for crowdfunding, that is for investment and loans, then mobile payments, then robo advisories for investment advisory, they're replacing that. InsurTech, RegTech is for insurance services and for regulatory purposes, compliance, right? So these are the applications of FinTech. But then what is the basis? How does FinTech come to be? Like what is special about what we call FinTech today as opposed to digital technology that has been used before? In the course of all these lectures, we've tried to distinguish what is new about this concept as opposed to saying every digital technology is FinTech, used in finance is FinTech, right? So the background of the technologies that are used are newer technologies, right? Newer in the sense they are coming into mainstream application now. It's not that they are sort of they were discovered in 2020. No, it's that they are getting wide scale application in common industries around this time, right? So those technologies, we have artificial intelligence, machine learning, big data and data analytics. We have robotic process automation, and we have blockchain. Now, when we go to the next slides, you will see the point I'm making about these not being exhaustive lists or this not being the only way to represent these things, right? So we have to always be don't take things as the gospel truth. Always question, is this the only way to do this? Can it be done in a different way? And when we question these things, only we can come up with better solutions, right? If we just take things as it is, oh, I was taught this, so this is what it is. No, we do always question, because these are new concepts, and new concepts get defined as we practice, as we use them. So we can be a part of the definition creation process as well, right? Right. So artificial intelligence. Have you heard of the term artificial intelligence, AI? Has anyone heard of the term AI?
Yes.
Okay. What is your understanding of it? Like when someone says artificial intelligence, what do you understand?
So being proactively understand the things and suggest the next course of action.
So conceptually, yes, but it is done through computers,
Yeah.
right? So it's natural intelligence, which is human intelligence, and artificial intelligence, which is machine intelligence, right? So now we are using technology and machines to make certain processes easier for us to do, right? So artificial intelligence refers to the simulation of human intelligence, right, in machines that are programmed to think like humans and mimic our actions, right? The term may also be applied to any machine that exhibits traits associated with the human mind, such as learning or problem solving. So artificial intelligence is a very wide area, right? This overall in computer programming, this overall field which tries to simulate human behavior, not human behavior, sorry, human intelligence, the way humans think. Now, in the previous technologies, what we saw was behavior replication, right? So automation is behavior. Now, instead of a hand going and tightening a nut or a bolt, a robotic arm will go and do it, right? Instead of by hand we are writing things, we will process the words in a computer, right? So that is an automation process. That is not a thinking process. Now here we are trying to train the machine to think like a human, right? And a human's thinking is very complex. So even though we don't appreciate sometimes our intelligence, when we make a decision, that's why we have things like called experience, right? Now the way a senior banker will make a decision when they see a number, and a way a junior banker will make a decision, seeing the same number, will be very different. Now, that is because of the amount of data that the senior banker has due to sheer experience. Now, it is experience in another word for experience would be data, right? It is information that we collect through our through our years of service. We keep collecting information and knowledge, and then we call this experience, but that is forms of data in our head. And when we see something, we use all that knowledge and experience and information to process something, right? And so the same thing, so the complex, so we can't put our, sometimes we can't explain why we are coming up with some decision, right? It's not so straightforward. It's not such a logical process of this equals that, that equals this, therefore this equals that. No, it is more complex. And that's why with seniority, people ask less questions and their experience is appreciated. Whereas from a junior, we will ask them to show us exactly how they reached that conclusion, right? They will have to prove, mathematically or logically, they will have to prove. Whereas a senior might take all this information and come up with a very different but correct decision. So now there is a complexity point here that we can't explain in human intelligence, right? That we get with extreme amount of data, right? Now, artificial intelligence also kind of tries to mimic this, right? To see if they can use lots of data and pick up human behavioral traits, because no matter what, there is a pattern, right? They try to pick up these patterns to see whether they can think like humans, right? So now common applications of artificial intelligence is the most common is machine learning. That is, you teach the machine to self-learn, right? Through data, through past data, they will learn. Just the way we also, with our past experience, we keep changing the way we make decisions, right? Now with COVID, we will change, our behaviors have changed a lot in a very short span of time. Many of us, our behavior has changed, right? The way we interact with people, right? What was even a few months before was considered perfectly all right, we now know that it is not so. We know the risks associated with that behavior. So in the same way, we change the software in our heads, right? We quickly change the algorithms to suit the new environment. So same way machine learning also tries to achieve that, right? And then there's something called big data and big data analytics. And then there's robotic process automation. Now this is why I said this diagram is not the be all and end all. Now this, they have shown this differently, right? Whereas here I am saying that these are subsets of AI, and which it is, right? AI is a big umbrella, right? And of this umbrella, these things come under them, right? So what is machine learning? So machine learning, have you heard of the term machine learning? Anyone has heard of the term machine learning?
Yes.
Okay, so did anyone say anything?
Yeah, I said yes, sir. Because the machine
Sorry.
learning is kind of a Facebook is learning our these things when we are searching something in Google, that advertisement will come on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter.
Yes.
It's a machine learning. That is a machine learning.
Yes, yes. So that is a good example. That is a very simple example that we all come across in our day-to-day lives, right? Where the software is taught to learn through our behavior. Then now we go and let's say we keep clicking on cake baking, right? We keep clicking. Next thing we know, everywhere, our news feeds, YouTube, everywhere, Facebook, across this, we will see cake baking, right? Whether we like it or not, or whether we're actually going to bake a cake or not, whether we are diabetic or not, it will come, right? So then this is machine learning. The machine is learning, right? So the machine doesn't know actually who we are, but it thinks through our behavior that we are interested, right? I often get very annoyed on YouTube if I go and click on something, then it shows everything else is that, when only one video is enough for my purpose, right? So it is machine learning is the study of computer algorithms that improve automatically through experience and by the use of data, right? So this automatic learning process, it is a method of data analysis that automates analytical model building, right? It is a branch of artificial intelligence based on the idea that systems can learn from data, identify patterns, and make decisions with minimal human intervention, right? So what we are we are moving from behavior automation, right? So practice automation to thinking automation, like automatically getting the machine to do certain activities that the human brain would do, right? Machine learning tends to be more accurate in drawing insights and making predictions when large volumes of data are fed into the system. Right now, this is my analogy to experience, right? So they are using the similar logic, right? So where the machine also can make more accurate insights if they have large volumes of data. But you will see that humans don't need that much of data to make the same decisions, right? But machines will do it in a sort of faster way, right? So then we have another term, big data. Anyone heard of the term big data? Big data, anyone? So big data basically means a lot of data, right? I mean, that's like the simple word, but it's been a very fashionable word in tech and then fintech and all of that in innovation, big data, right? So it's not just large volumes of data, but it is also a method of analysis, right? It's also part of AI, as I said, right? So big data is a field that treats ways to analyze, systematically extract information from or otherwise deal with data sets that are too large or complex to be dealt with by traditional data processing application software, right? So we are talking about another level of data size here, right? So if it can be processed through a normal Excel sheet, it's not big data, right? That's like a very rule of thumb sort of distinction we can make. So if you can process the amount of data that you have with an Excel sheet, right, even like with all the Excel rows and columns, it's still not big data, right? We're talking about data, volumes of data that is larger than that, right? Data with many fields, columns offer greater statistical power, while data with higher complexity may lead to a higher false discovery rate. Big data analysis challenges include capturing data, data storage, data analysis, search, sharing, transfer, visualizing, querying, updating. So it's quite vast, right? So current use of the term big data tends to refer to the use of predictive analytics, right? That is to predict behavior, right? And user behavior analytics or certain other advanced data analytics methods that extract value from big data and sell them to a particular size of data set, right? So it's I'm using very simple definitions that basically straight from Wikipedia. So the good thing about Wikipedia for this sort of learning is that Wikipedia, you might remember, is open source, right? We talked about the concept of open source in previous lectures, which means that a lot of people come and check it and correct it, right? So in the sense, we can take statements from single well-renowned authors. We can also take from things like Wikipedia. For concepts like this, right, I think it's more simpler to take from Wikipedia because the type of people who deal with things like big data and AI are also people who contribute to things like Wikipedia. So you will constantly have the information in those pages getting updated and cross-checked, right? So then robotic process automation. Now we are coming step by step, we are coming to less complex forms of AI, right? And robotic process automation probably is more common than the other two even now, but banks do use machine learning models and big data models as well. But this is more, I think this is more common, right? So robotic process automation is a form of business process automation, right? Technology based on metaphorical software robots, right? Or AI digital workers. It's sometimes referred to as software robotics, right? So now this is the distinction. This is very technical, but the difference is that in the traditional workflow automation tools, now they have written it this very clearly, a software developer produces a list of actions to automate a task and interface at the back end, right? Using internal application programming interfaces. Now we learned this term also, APIs, when we were studying open banking, right? and dedicated scripting language. In contrast, robotic process or automation systems develop the action list by watching the user perform that task in the application's user interface, right? And then perform the automation by repeating those tasks directly in the user interface, right? This can lower the barrier to use of automation in products that might not otherwise be able to use APIs, right? So this is how now the way of doing things itself has changed, right? So, and they are looking at how the user behaves now, just like us going and clicking on Google and all of that. This looks at how the user behaves, and then the system learns from it, right? So RPA has several applications in banking. So lot of sort of lower skill requiring processes can be automated, right? These are not automation of, these are not sort of normal workflow automation, but a more sort of slightly more intelligent form of automation, but of more routine work, right? So customer service queries, like we have chatbots and everything, right? So most of your banks already have this, popping up and saying, can I help you? And mostly they work as search engines almost. And then they ask at the end, did this help you, right? And then if you say no, then they know something's wrong with it. Then for compliance, things like accounts payable, credit card processing, where they take the information instead of the officer going through all the information and checking the customer's history, the system can do it, right? Same for mortgage. Fraud detection as well, right? Where they can group behavior, right, with multiple transactions. And I think your systems probably already have similar processes of flagging. Do they have it, Diaparen? You're in compliance, right?
For us, it's not.
No, you don't have a flagging method still.
No, not right.
So you have to figure out the patterns yourself.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, these softwares are already there. They fall into the area of RegTech, and these softwares are there where they automatically you can set, you can group behavior and flag. Then KYC processes, again checking customer data, screening and validating. Then even general ledger for general ledger work, right? You can these process automations can go across systems and validate and do the updating, right? Instead of now, this is especially useful because in banks, the traditional systems, as you know, it's siloed, right? So the credit card people will only be doing, they have their separate systems. The general ledger crowd are doing another one, right? The mortgage, all that loads people are doing through another one, but across it's not so interoperable. So these systems can fix these problems, right? And then even things like report automation, account closure, all these things are possible and they are being used. Probably not so much in Sri Lanka, but across the world these are used, because this is not very advanced level of AI, right? This is more simpler, accessible forms of AI. The source to this article is also here. As I always do, I always put the sources so you can also go and read yourself, or any other areas as well, right? So AI in everyday life. So as we said, AI applications require large volumes of data to get the good robust patterns, right? To get reliable and relevant outcomes. So areas where we see it in daily life, as the Aparan mentioned, we have feed ranking, right? So we will, when we search something in Sri Lanka, what we see in Sri Lanka and what we see in UK are different, right? If it is a female, if they know that we are a female, then what we see is different as opposed to a male. Based on the age group, it will change. Based on our past behavior, it will change. So it's all changing based on data, right? Navigation, video games, all these things now use machine learning models, right? So AI in fintech, right? Now, the thing about financial services is we often ignore, but now Facebook generates, actually AI became very popular and machine learning because people realized in the mid of like 2000s that Facebook is generating, Facebook, YouTube, Google, those are generating so much data because we are always clicking, right? So every click is a data. So every time we click, it's data. So they realize people are generating so much data, so they are started to become value because they realize that they can use this data for to target advertisements, right? So there was suddenly there was value in our clicks. So for us, though, we are just going about and clicking and clicking on people's pictures and clicking on sites and all these things, to them it was value, right? So this is how AI really picked up, because it's just enormous amounts of data. And in the finance sector also, there is a lot of data, right? Now this is one of the reasons why non-banks have been trying to enter the banking industry, because they feel that bankers don't know the value of the data that they have, right? We know the value of it. We know the amount of actual money we have, but we don't know the intrinsic value of the data we have, right? In terms of providing more value-added services to customers, right? So every day banks are generating so much data in terms of transactions, bills, payments, the customers, the way with which vendor does the customer connect. All this data is with basically banks. Probably now with increased electronic transactions, banks probably know the customer better than Facebook, right? Because what the bank has an actual transaction, whereas in Facebook, the Facebook doesn't know whether we have completed the transaction. They know that we are interested, right? But banks know exactly what we have done because we have completed a transaction, right? When we transfer money, when we pay it, that transaction is complete, right? Not just going and clicking, right? So so the quality of the data is also much better because it is a confirmed behavior. So this is why AI becomes very applicable to fintech, right? So the common uses, we already saw this in the robotic automation, and it just becomes more advanced for KYC, onboarding, fraud prevention, portfolio management, right? And trading. We learned this in when we did robo advisors, right? Algorithmic trading. Now, when you can just tell, okay, what sort of stocks you want and what percentages you want, and then the algorithm will keep changing, right? You don't have to do anything. We have a little video here if you want.
Contrary to traditional data analytics and robotic process automation, artificial intelligence has four special features. The first one is that it will detect change in data patterns and tune the model by itself. You do not need data scientists to keep tuning the model. Secondly, when the data quality is not perfect, it can actually still create useful insights for business to make decisions. Thirdly, when the data is coming in, we do not need to store it and process it, transform it before we can create analytics. It can just stream through the neural network, and the AI engine can pick up the pattern and help business to serve their customers. And fourth is that it can handle unstructured data. Therefore, we can apply AI in places like image recognition or voice recognition. It's different from traditional analytics in a way that you cannot use it for regulatory reporting because you cannot get the model out of the neural network and show it to the regulator. In financial services, we actually apply that in three major areas. The first one is machine learning to create propensity models. So we see banks and insurance companies putting machine learning on their website or mobile channels and create real-time target marketing. They actually predict the product propensity of the customer based on the behavioral data real time. Second application is usually around natural language processing. Some application like chatbots, some like contract intelligence, where the AI can actually read the free text of the contract and detect on compliance in the documents. The third application is image recognition. We see a lot of Fintech asking the customers to take a selfie and also take a picture of their identity document, and the machine will match these two automatically and help them to do KYC and onboarding. To have artificial intelligence work effectively, the financial institutes need to have a lot of big data. So a lot of banks or insurance companies, when they already accumulate a lot of big data, they can actually tap to this pool of resources and create useful business. The future of AI lies in parsing training tests for one, and singularity point for two. AI scientists continue to improve the technology, and their aim is to pass a training test by which the customer can actually interface with the machine without knowing that they are actually interacting with the machine. There are a lot of gurus in the area that concern when AI can learn how to improve itself, and they call this the singularity.
So they raised some points here. Did you hear that? Sorry, I forgot to ask if you heard the video. What was the danger that the person was describing of AI? So what was the...
We might lose our privacy. Singularity.
So singularity is not privacy, but where robots or machines take over us because they become so much like us. Now, that was what he was describing as saying, where they want to, where they aim to improve it to such a level that we can't notice that it is a bot. Now, to some extent, we have some chatbots. They are very realistic. They have a picture of a person, they have an actual name, and to some extent, to a certain point, you realize, you feel okay, you're talking to an actual person. But then when you start asking more complex questions, you realize it is not an actual person. Now, this is what they are trying to achieve, right? This singularity, where the machine and the human are one, right? But now this is what a lot of people are afraid of, saying that people will lose their jobs once AI systems start to take over, and all the thinking will be done by machines, right? And then people won't have any jobs to do. I mean, these are fair fears, I think, because even with robots and all of that, it's the similar fear. Now we are very afraid of robots taking over, but if you have seen like Toyota and all these big car companies, most of their production is automated. So you have actual robotic arms coming and doing things. So I think it's the switch of the type of work. Now, you will find that in your banks, as you have with time, you have less stenographers, right? You have less typists. And all of us have been given our own computers to type, right? So we generate our own letters and everything. So in the same way, we have less office assistants, right? So there are certain jobs that will evolve. The lower skill, we now with robotic process automation, lower skill jobs will change or will disappear, and the system will do it, right? But instead, there will be new types of services coming up with this new data, right? Which will create new jobs. So it's a constantly changing atmosphere. So I think this is a part of the reason that we are having this course, so that you know what is changing, and you also as bankers can adapt, right? Depending on how long you have your service, you may or may not see that these particular changes happening in the institution that you are in. But overall, the entire industry is going that way, and we know more. Or if you ask your banks, digital, if even if you don't know whether this is happening in your bank right now, you can go and speak to your digital innovation group or head IT or whoever. They will say that, okay, we have AI plans for AI, we have plans for machine learning, we have been doing this, that, because this is normal now, right? These are not these are not these hugely sort of exclusive specialized areas. These are sort of common knowledge now, and these changes will take place without, because of this tendency towards being singular. If the changes will happen even without sometimes you knowing, because they will happen without in the back end, right? So, so remember how these changes are there. And also, one is from a employment point of view, and the other is bringing in new projects and bringing in new efficiencies. As managers, as leaders in the banks, in the industry, you must see how can we harness these new technologies to give a better service, more services to the customer, right? With more efficiencies. More efficiencies means then you have time to do more sort of valuable or creative work, right? Now, as for instance, we have a lot of data, right? Banks have a lot of data. But are we using that data for research, right? Like not just big data-based research, but where we look at relationships and we analyze relations. No, those sort of things don't happen less, because we are stuck with doing a lot of routine work, right? So if we can automate the routine work, then we have more time for ourselves, right? So we really have to choose, okay, what is the cost benefit of getting a human to do it, or investing in a system to do it, right? And when you are investing in a system, there is no point in just going and setting up a system, because these systems are not cheap and they also need a lot of data. So if the data is not available, then your machine won't be able to give you good predictions, right? And the results will be skewed. So it's very important that you figure out, is this the right technology for my bank, for my project, right? Just doing it for the sake of doing it also is pointless. Now we see this, a lot of people, when they see some new technology, they want to say, oh, my bank is doing it, but it is not the right solution for the problem, right? It is a solution, and it can't find a correct problem to suit it, right, within the bank or within the industry. So when you are doing that, you have to always balance, okay, we have a new technology, what is the problem we want to solve? Can this technology solve this problem? No, then we'll leave it be. And now, the ideal way to approach this is, what is the problem? How do we solve it? What technology should we use? But because of this drive for digital innovation and promotion of digitalization, we often get bombarded with the new technologies first. So we have to be very, very careful not to get swept up and make wrong decisions, right? Um, Any questions so far? Okay, if there are no questions, we'll go to the next technology, which is blockchain technology. Now, blockchain technology, this means a key, CK, let me just set the CK here. Blockchain technology is actually, it's different to AI based technologies, right? And this is a very important technology that has come up in the recent past. So blockchain is basically a list of records, right? Now I took this from Wikipedia as well because it's very simple the way they describe it, right? And those records are called blocks. Okay, and they are linked together using cryptography. Each block contains a hash of the previous block, right? So this creates a timestamp and there is a transaction data. Now, this is really important, this timestamp, right? The timestamp proves that the transaction data existed when the block was published in order to get into its hash, right? Blocks form a chain, each with each additional block reinforcing the one before, right? So this is how the technology works. Therefore, blockchains are resistant to modification of their data because once recorded, the data in any given block cannot be altered retroactively. Now, we can, if we take an Excel sheet, we can go and delete the data, right? Now, in the blockchain, if we try to delete it, now that action will also get recorded, right? And all the subsequent blocks will also get affected. Now, you can't just in the middle go and pull out a block like that. Blockchains are typically managed by peer-to-peer networks, right? And this is called distributed ledger. Therefore, another word for blockchain technology is distributed ledger technology. Where the nodes collectively adhere to a protocol to communicate and validate new blocks, right? So the peers will all, when one person makes a change, all the peers will validate that change, and that's how it becomes a valid blockchain, right? There's a video, a very simple video. We'll just look at that.
For just $67, you can make as many videos as you want, and you never need to pick up a camera or you.
Blockchains are incredibly popular nowadays. But what is a blockchain? How do they work? What problems do they solve? And how can they be used? Like the name indicates, a blockchain is a chain of blocks that contains information. This technique was originally described in 1991 by a group of researchers and was originally intended to timestamp digital documents so that it's not possible to backdate them or to tamper with them, almost like a notary. However, it went by mostly unused until it was adapted by Satoshi Nakamoto in 2009 to create the digital cryptocurrency Bitcoin. Now, a blockchain is a distributed ledger that is completely open to anyone. They have an interesting property. Once some data has been recorded inside the blockchain, it becomes very difficult to change it. So how does that work? Well, let's take a closer look at a block. Each block contains some data, the hash of the block, and the hash of the previous block. The data that is stored inside a block depends on the type of blockchain. The Bitcoin blockchain, for example, stores the details about a transaction layer, such as the sender, receiver, and the amount of coins. A block also has a hash. You can compare a hash to a fingerprint. It identifies a block and all of its contents, and it's always unique, just as a fingerprint. Once a block is created, its hash is being calculated. Changing something inside the block will cause the hash to change. So in other words, hashes are very useful when you want to detect changes to blocks. If the fingerprint of a block changes, it no longer is the same block. The third element inside each block is the hash of the previous block. And this effectively creates a chain of blocks, and it's this technique that makes a blockchain so secure. Let's take an example. Here we have a chain of 3 blocks. As you can see, each block has a hash and the hash of the previous block. So block number 3 points to block number 2, and number 2 points to number 1. Now the first block is a bit special. It cannot point to previous blocks because, well, it's the first one. We call this block the genesis block. Now let's say that you tamper with the second block. This causes the hash of the block to change as well. In turn, that will make block 3 and all following blocks invalid because they no longer store a valid hash of the previous block. So changing a single block will make all following blocks invalid. But using hashes is not enough to prevent tampering. Computers these days are very fast and can calculate hundreds of thousands of hashes per second. You can effectively tamper with a block and recalculate all the hashes of other blocks to make your blockchain valid again. So to mitigate this, blockchains have something that is called proof of work. It's a mechanism that slows down the creation of new blocks. In Bitcoin's case, it takes about 10 minutes to calculate the required proof of work and add a new block to the chain. This mechanism makes it very hard to tamper with the blocks because if you tamper with one block, you'll need to recalculate the proof of work for all the following blocks. So the security of a blockchain comes from its creative use of hashing and the proof of work mechanism. But there is one more way that blockchains secure themselves, and that is by being distributed. Instead of using a central entity to manage the chain, blockchains use a peer-to-peer network and everyone is allowed to join. When someone joins this network, he gets a full copy of the blockchain. The node can use this to verify that everything is still in order. Now, let's see what happens when someone creates a new block. That block is sent to everyone on the network. Each node then verifies the block to make sure that it hasn't been tampered with. And if everything checks out, each node adds this block to their own blockchain. All the nodes in this network create consensus. They agree about what blocks are valid and which aren't. Blocks that are tampered with will be rejected by other nodes in the network. So to successfully tamper with a blockchain, you'll need to tamper with all the blocks on the chain, redo the proof of work for each block, and take control of more than 50% of the peer-to-peer network. Only then will your tampered block become accepted by everyone else. So this is almost impossible to do. Blockchains are also constantly evolving. One of the most recent developments is the creation of smart contracts. These contracts are simple programs that are stored on the blockchain and can be used to automatically exchange coins based on certain conditions. More on smart contracts in a later video. The creation of blockchain technology piqued a lot of people's interest. Soon others realized that this technology could be used for other things, like storing medical records, creating a digital notary, or even collecting taxes. So now you know what a blockchain is, how it works on a basic level, and what problems it solves. Want to learn how you can implement?
So that was a very simple description of what a blockchain is. And I wanted to play that full video to you is because it is important and banks here have started considering the use of blockchain. Central bank is also having a project for blockchain. And across the world, banking is using blockchain for various purposes now because of this, because it is secure, because of this concept of immutability, right? It's very difficult to sort of tamper with the data because of this hashing method and the proof of work and the peer-to-peer validation and all of that, right? So it's difficult to tamper with data. So it's very good for things like KYC, for ensuring trust in a process, right? So what we mean by trust is, now if we take correspondent banking, right? Most of correspondent banking is intermediary banks are saying, okay, we will guarantee the funds. We will guarantee, we are saying, okay, this person has the funds, if not, I will pay. That's basically what's going from bank to bank. But with the blockchain, all those guarantees are not required because they can verify is this the other person on the other end, and then only that person can make this transaction, and then it goes. That's how smart contracts come about, right? That third party requirement becomes less, right? So this is also an issue that has been popping up. What happens to these old the established value chains or banking processes, the intermediation? Will the intermediaries lose their jobs? Right? Of course, money will get saved. Now you have for remittances, there are several blockchain-based remittance methods, like Bitpesa, and they don't need the intermediaries, right? So we have to remember now these new technologies are really changing the way traditional banking was done. Now that is what is called fintech, right? It is changing the traditional processes and bringing whole new processes that they're changing the supply chains. Okay. So these are some of the use cases of blockchain, right? It's so wide. No, this is a 2018 diagram, right? In banking for shared KYC, payments and settlements, cryptocurrencies, everything we can use blockchain. Now, if you look at these, now look here, diamonds, DBS Group, which is one of the largest diamond manufacturer, like they have mines and they have shops and everything, is using blockchain to track the importation and sale of diamonds, right? And here we are. In China, in a tax-based initiative is using blockchain to store tax records and electronic invoices, right? And all over the world, we can see that blockchain is getting used for wide amount of users, right? So those are the key technologies. Any questions so far regarding those and its application? They might sound very like you might think, oh, why are we learning this? These are not applicable. You know, in my day-to-day work, I am not seeing this anywhere. Why are we learning this? But it's important because there is a good chance you will see it in the very near future, right? And it's better you learn these, and instead of being someone who is accepting from the learning from another, you can be the one teaching and leading, right? So or giving recommendations and all of that. So any questions so far? No. Right. So then initiatives to promote fintech, right? So now we learned in the previous lectures of the benefits of fintech, right? For financial inclusion, for economic growth, for increasing efficiencies in systems. So due to the advantages of fintech, and fintech really, as we learned in other lectures as well, they target the peripheries that have generally been left out by the traditional banking system, right? Services and customers, right? Some services are not offered by traditional banks, but with new technology, using the data that is available, using the technology in the hands of the customers, you can provide new services, right? So fintech allows that, and therefore there are more efficiencies, cost savings. We might not see large profits at the moment, but we are seeing a lot of efficiencies and a lot of people coming into the financial system more actively, right? Now, very simple thing is now credit card payments, right? You know, those days to pay the credit card, we have to go to the bank and fill that form and put it into that box or something and come. And then later there was internet banking, right? Where we had to log in and Now it's saved on the app. The card details is saved on the app. I get the SMS from the bank and I just pay it, right? That matter is over, and I'm paying because some people they put a standing order, but they don't know whether it's the right amount. Now I can pay the exact amount. I get the bank sends me the credit card amount, and I just pay it, right? It's like a 1 minute thing, right? It's far faster than internet banking. And so sometimes because of internet, you think, okay, now I have to go and log in with all my passwords and the OTP and all of that, and then you postpone it to some time. Then sometimes you have missed the payment, right? But here, as you get it, you can immediately pay it off, and the matter is done. So simple things like that. Now you might not be initially be able to capture the savings or something for the customer, but in the long run, if you can calculate, okay, how many times have I missed it, and then how much have I saved without having to pay fees, right? And for the bank also, I think banks prefer to have delayed payments a bit because then they can charge. But is that the case? Or do you like your customers paying their credit card bills on time? No response. But these are the conveniences that fintech. This is something very simple one. But when you go to the peripheries, right? When you go to people who find it more difficult to come to banks, right, for various reasons, and people who need very different services than the traditional services that the banks provide, right? Like fund management, like managing small amounts of funds. So these sort of different things, or having difficulty in providing KYC documentation the way the banks expect them, or being eligible for loans with the way that banks have traditionally been screening their customers. So in these cases, fintechs become really important, right? And this is why it's important to promote fintech, right? So there are different ways that the world, this is world over, right? So these are for not only fintech, also for digital innovation, any type of innovation also these are there, right? So there are these special setups to promote this because you have the arm of, you need a software development product. It has to be a product that works in the market. They have to be able to access the market. So basic business, right? So it's not just enough to develop a nice shiny app, right? It should be able to serve a purpose, get to the market, and also make money, right? Otherwise, it's not sustainable. So to help this, there are things like startup incubators. Now you know what an incubator is. You know when a child is sort of born prematurely, you put them into a incubator, right? So the same concept. This is the business which is in its very young stages, right? So they need a lot of help. So they create these incubators where the startups are offered funding, right? How to develop their business model. They give them network connections, right? Like networking to develop their expertise, and also these are mostly physical spaces, right? Physical spaces. Now in Colombo, have you all heard of Hatch? Have you heard of Hatch in York Street?
Yes, yes.
Right. So Hatch kind of works as an incubator to some extent, right? It also has a a named fintech accelerator, but it has an incubation space, right? So if you are a company, you can hire a desk or a room or some space at Hatch. There are mentorship programs. They have funding programs, and venture capitalists come and try to help them out, and also business development and all that happens. So that is sort of Hatch is created for that purpose, right? So if we go broad, it's the number of incubators and accelerators in other countries are just, there are so many, right? and there are many businesses who pick up and do very well from that, right? And then fintech accelerators are targeted for fintech itself, right? And then they also most of the time they take existing products. It's a sort of not startups that are at incubator level, but slightly more advanced startups that they have now already tried their product in the market, or there are some smaller issues, and then these specific issues are addressed in the accelerator, and they are helped to go into market and see, right? Then there is other group called regulatory sandbox. Have you heard that term, regulatory sandbox? Now you have sandbox and regulatory sandbox, right? So sandboxes are pretty much like incubators, but even more basic than incubators, because they allow people to test out things there at the sandbox. It's like, can play around with things, and you have space to play around with things. A regulatory sandbox is slightly different in the sense the regulatory sandbox is a framework set up by the regulator that allows fintech startups and other innovators to conduct live experiments, right? Live experiments in a controlled environment under the regulator's supervision. Now, this is very important. When we come to fintech, as you know, financial industry is highly regulated, right? So many fintechs have this issue of regulation, like they can't get around the regulation, right? And then sometimes there are things, their innovations fail because they can't solve the regulatory issues, or they can't or they will continuously just innovate outside in areas that the regulations allow, and there won't be any good sort of any sort of major use of technology where in areas that are being regulated. But what we have to remember is regulation is there to prevent some wrong, right, from happening. So if technology can prevent that wrong from happening, right, then that regulatory requirement can be relaxed. But we need to be able to test this, right? So in order to test this, what countries across the world have done is they set up, central banks have set up regulatory sandbox. And in the regulatory sandbox, what they do is they will select good fintechs, right, that are ready to go to market. Not not the ones in the incubators or in the basic startup sandbox levels, but these are more advanced fintechs, and they will say, okay, we have this really good innovation to solve all these problems, but this regulation is preventing us from doing it. Then the regulator will look at it and say, okay, we will relax this particular regulation. You go to the market and you try it out, right? And then we can see whether there is actually some risk, whether people are losing their money, or the system is failing, or the vice that the regulation was trying to fix has not been addressed, right? Then we can draw them back and say, okay, not approved to go to market, regulation remains. But if it is successful, then the regulator can say, okay, we are going to amend this regulation if you can use this technology and proceed, right? So this is what a regulatory sandbox does. It is very powerful. Right. So now if we take fintech promotion, it's 10:50. We have a few more slides. Can we have just a few more slides here. Is it okay if we just take a small break and come? Right. So let's get back to our presentation. Right. So we did blockchain technology. Any questions so far? No questions? Okay. Right. So now initiatives to promote fintech in Sri Lanka, right? So we also have been taking several, I think central banks across the world have been taking these measures, and this is under our payment, national payment roadmap, right? So all the banks, I think I told you all in the beginning when we were looking at the institutional framework, all the banks are banking industry is represented in the National Payment Council, and it's through that we do these initiatives, right, to promote fintech in Sri Lanka. So with all the banks, we do this. So one was establishing a fintech regulatory sandbox in 2020 February, right? So Sri Lanka also has a fintech regulatory sandbox, and this one, the central bank itself developed it, right? It's not from the APC. We developed it on our own with public consultations and consultations from the banks and all of that, right? And now it is functioning from last year. It's been available, right? But not everyone can join the regulatory sandbox, right? As I said, you have to, there is a criteria, right? There is a eligibility criteria to join the sandbox. Now, what is the sandbox? Now, the way that we have defined what a sandbox is that it is a framework set up by Central Bank of Sri Lanka to allow small scale live testing of innovations of select entities, right? Not everyone. It's a small scale live testing, right? In a controlled environment. That is, a controlled environment is operating under special exemption, allowance, or other limited time bound exception, right? Under the central bank supervision. So it's not just it's not controlled environment in the sense we don't just say, now go to Candy and try this out. No, that's not a controlled environment. It is got a very special exemption, right? And it's also limited in time, so you can't keep doing it forever, right? And the central bank monitors this. So it's a very specific group of people who can get into the sandbox, right? So the objectives of the sandbox is to facilitate robust and sustainable innovations that can enable more efficient financial intermediation, greater financial inclusion, and create a less cash society through digitalization, right? So this is an important point. Robust and sustainable innovations. Because it's very easy to come up with innovations and say, okay, I am new and I'm different. But it's difficult to keep it sustainable, like any other business, right? So how do you keep an innovation going? So it's not every business can last long. So it gets really tested when they come into the sandbox, right? It's not easy. To provide a safe, bounded space within a controlled environment for selected innovators to test their products and services without the risk of infringing regulatory requirements. Now, this is the point what I was saying earlier. The regulations might impede certain innovations because the regulations were made at a different time, when technology was different, when people's use of technology was different, when the services were also different. But but now in the current context with new technology, maybe we can change those regulations here and there. So but now if someone goes to try that out without permission, then they are violating the laws, right? But so to ensure that we can safely test this, we create this regulatory space, and it is only the central bank or the regulator who can do it, because it is our regulation, right? So if someone else can't go and say, here this it's fine, you break this law, then we can take action. But here we are the ones who say, okay, for this particular time in this particular setting, you can test this product, right? And then provide innovators with an opportunity to better equip themselves to seek regulatory approval, right? So in the process of being in the sandbox, it doesn't mean that that product itself is going to take place or be the final product that is getting a regulatory approval. The regulator might notice that while the fintech says, oh, this regulation is in the way, the regulator might realize it's not the regulation, it is something else, right? And then the fintech can change its business model. Alternatively, the regulator can say, okay, it might actually be the regulation that is in the way, and this regulation is preventing a lot of good products and services coming into the market that will not affect financial system stability, right, in the country. So in that case, the regulator can take steps to change the regulation, right? So the benefits of the sandbox, right? As the sandbox will improve accessibility, efficiency, security, quality of financial services offered by financial institutions. The sandbox will help in reducing regulatory uncertainty faced by fintechs, thereby enabling them to focus on innovations, right? So now when fintechs have some query, like I'm not sure whether, because especially now fintechs, they cross many lines. They are not banks, they are not IT companies, they do multiple services together, they want to find shortcuts, and there are established divisions between certain systems. There are certain, now not all financial institutions, not all now, for instance, if you take payment service providers, not all payment service providers are financial institutions, right? Their payment institutions are different. So then there are reasons why those divisions are maintained. Not all banks are commercial banks. Not all banks are savings. There are reasons that those divisions are maintained. But technology can cut through all of that, because with technology you can do anything. But the problem is, the reason that there are those divisions is to maintain certain level of order and minimize risk, right? So fintechs might, when they are going through these innovations, it might not be clear for them whether a regulation is in the way or not. And sometimes what they think is in the way is sometimes not in the way, right? They have just misunderstood. So it's important. So this sandbox allows the regulator to have a direct connection with the fintech to, in case they think that a regulation is in the way, right? So and then the sandbox will also aid in the reduction of costs and time for successful fintech applications to reach the market, thus providing greater feasibility for their initiatives, right? Because it's getting checked by the central bank, right? It's getting its chance of being more successful when it's going into market is higher, right? The sandbox will provide regulators with necessary insight on the new and emerging technological developments which may require regulatory facilitation and intervention, right? So that's the other side of it. Now the eligibility criteria. Now both local and foreign applicants can apply for the sandbox. All sandbox applicants must either be or partner with a CBSL licensed financial institution in order to consider entry into the sandbox. Now, this is very important. This is the model that the central bank uses, right? So, when we are when we are considering any proposals, even outside the sandbox, right? Outside the sandbox, all these fintechs that are happening so far are things that came outside the sandbox, because the sandbox is very recent, right? So they all have to come with a bank, because that is the model Sri Lanka adopts. Even EasyCash, Mcash, they all have. I remember when I was explaining EasyCash and Mcash, I was saying how Sri Lanka has a distinct model. In Africa and all of that, the mobile money, they give the license directly to the telecommunication company. Here, no, the license is given to the bank, and the bank is the one who takes the responsibility for the safety of the funds, right? The telecommunication provider is an infrastructure provider. So here also you have to come with a bank, because the bank guarantees the safety of the funds, right? And ensures compliance. So KYC, all those things, banks know how to do it. So that's why we say come with a bank. If you can't get a bank to join you, that is also a good test, right? When the third party is coming in, if you can't find a good bank to connect with, At that point, it's at that initial point, if you can't convince a bank to help you, then there might be something wrong with your product, right? Because the bank is now, there's two rounds of checking. First, the commercial banks are checking, okay, is this a good viable product? If not, it doesn't work, right? Because once it goes through all this place, all the central bank processes, and then if the banks say no, this product is, we don't want this product connected to our systems, or we don't think this is a good product, then it can't reach its market, right? So this is why we say come with the banks. Of course, the fintechs have a big issue with this sometimes, because they can't find banks, they can't convince banks, and then they're like, why can't we directly come to the central bank? We're like, no, it's your market, you try to see how it works for you, right? Applicants should identify the regulations that are wholly or partly incompatible with the process of implementing their innovations, right? So I'm reading the eligibility criteria here. So you can't just come into the sandbox. You must identify which regulation is in your way, right? So because we are talking about the unregulated entities, right? They can think, oh, it's very nice to come to the central bank and get approval. No, you have to be very clearly able to show that a regulation is in your way. Otherwise, you can't, you are not eligible to enter the regulatory sandbox, right? Then the offered solution should conform to the following criteria, right? It must be innovative. The offered solution is required to be either truly innovative or significantly different to existing products and services in the market. Now, why is that important? Why do you think that is important? When it's coming to the fintech regulatory sandbox, it is important for it to be truly innovative or significantly different from the existing products and services in the market. Any idea why it is important for the product to be truly innovative or significantly different from the existing products in the market? Because if it is already existing, there is no reason for us to check. It is already something that can be done, because we don't go to give individual products their okays. We give the process or that function only, we give approval. So if one person is doing it, then the other person also, it's not illegal. The activity is fine, right? This is to check the activity. So if the activity is already being done in the market, then there is no reason to come, right? They can go and do it. Then the innovation should be tested. Now this is the other reason. Now I said, remember I said it, you can't, not these incubator stages, startups, these are tested ones. The offered solution must be thoroughly tested in a lab environment prior to being submitted to the sandbox. Test results should be verified by an independent third-party auditor to ascertain that the implementation of the solution has been completed, right? So this is not a process where you come and, now there are certain accelerators, incubators, you come with half-baked products and then you keep working with the regulator or whoever is giving you guidance to further improve the product. This is not one of those. This is merely to check the regulatory point, whether it is having some regulatory issue, right? Then it must be beneficial. The offered solution must clearly identify its benefits to the customer. Example, enhanced efficiency, increased safety, better customer experience, lower price, financial inclusion. So you must, it's a very stringent requirement, right? So it's not easy to qualify to get into the fintech regulatory sandbox. And this is mainly because the purpose is very specific, right? So if they just want incubator, they can go to places like Hatch, right? But if they want regulatory assistance, where they can very clearly identify that a regulation is in their way of a very good beneficial innovation, then they can come to the Sandbox through application, right? If not, the normal process is you can send your proposals to the Payments and Settlements Department or bank supervision or non-bank supervision, and then we go through each and every proposal and we tell them, okay, these are the things that you have to do. Right? Many banks actually come through that process and not through this, because this is very specific, and also the given laws in Sri Lanka are not so that are laws that are relevant for fintech are not so strict, because the field is still developing. They have a lot of space, right? And we have very few points that regulatory tighten them. But from areas like KYC and AML, of course, those are international standards they have to comply with, right? Any questions? Now, if we look at you can go to this link, right? This is the Fintech Regulatory Sandbox of Sri Lanka, the framework. Now it has everything here, right? You can this is full document is here online. The eligibility criteria, everything is there, right? Applications, everything, and this is the process, right? This is the stages of the sandbox, right? So you, from the application gets assessed. Does it meet the eligibility criteria? Yes, right? And then if there are clarifications, it goes back. If not, this is the internal committee that checks whether it meets the criteria, right? And then the applications processing starts happen, and then the KPIs, all of those are kept there, and then the testing takes place, right? Either then you graduate or you get an extension. Either way, then you exist, right? So this is how the flow happens, and this is of course, as you can see, a more stringent process. So this is for very specific types of fintechs, right? Then another initiative that we took to promote fintech is the shared KYC blockchain technology POC, right? Now, blockchain technology has now, as the presentation, the YouTube video showed, it's been there for some time, and now for about the last 3-4 years, central banks have world over have been considering the value of blockchain technology for financial services as well as banks, right? So we also started a POC. We had a committee, and from that POC, we identified that from that original committee, we identified that there is some significant benefits that blockchain technology could bring to Sri Lankan financial industry as well. So we thought we will do a proof of concept, right? Do you know what a proof of concept is? Do you know what a proof of concept is? So a proof of concept is when we have, it is what it is. It is the proof that the concept is working, right? So in software development, when you have a prototype, you do a proof of concept to see whether it works. So it is sort of like a prototype. It's like a smaller version. If you check it to see whether it works, and then if it works, you go into actual production, right? So here we are only doing a proof of concept because we want to see how blockchain works, right? And to this, we have decided to apply blockchain for shared KYC. Now, blockchain can be applied, as we saw in the previous slide, to a wide range of things, right? But we thought, okay, we will check shared KYC. And then we invited, internationally, we called for applications. saying anyone come. And this is a volunteer project because this is done under the NPC with the original designs. All of that committees were all with banks, IT companies, and the central bank, all on voluntary basis, right? So then we said, okay, anyone who wants to join in, any software development company who wants to join in on a volunteer basis and develop these POCs, come and apply before the end of 2019. And we asked, this was the advertisement that we published, right? And it was actually, it got circulated globally in all these global blockchain websites and all of that. This was published, right? And then we received we have received applications from over 40 companies, right? Including 17 foreign companies to develop this free of charge for us, right? And then so it was we were really surprised not surprised, we weren't expecting so much of response to even develop this free, because there is so much interest in blockchain, and there's also so much there is difficulty in getting blockchain introduced into financial services, because all the financial services are already highly digitalized. So the decision to move to blockchain, which is a new system, that you will have to revamp some of your existing systems and probably uh, decommission them as well. So in that sense, these are big decisions. So financial services and like institutions are not very eager to let go of their former investments, right? So it takes some time. So it's very important that they come in. So we realized this interest. And then we selected 3 groups from these, from 3 applicants from these. That is Sampath Bank and University of Colombo was one applicant, then a Swedish company called Noblock, and then a joint application from 2 Sri Lankan companies. And then we have been, they have working on the POC from last June, and we have now reached its completion. We're at the very final stage of the POC project, and I'm also involved in it. And it's been a very interesting project because we are testing a whole new technology and how it works and the efficiencies involved, right? It's going to be interesting how the future holds in terms of using blockchain technology in Sri Lanka. So apart from this, so these are the main sort of our work in supporting technologies and the standard things that are done to promote fintech, right? Additionally, there are infrastructure, and infrastructure is not just technological infrastructure, it is also legal infrastructure, right? That has been supporting fintech, right? One is the launch of CEFs. When we discuss CEFs, you may recall, I said CEFs is very, very versatile, right? So CEFs has been the basis for payment innovations. The new type of payment innovations in Sri Lanka, the mobile payment, the internet payment innovations are coming from the basis of CEFs, because it allows retail real-time payments. Not RTGS is critical, time critical, large value generally, right? CEFs is retail value, small values, because fintech is mainly now targeting the smaller values, right? That's what we've been talking, the peripheries, the underserved customers. So CEFs provides that platform, the infrastructural platform to provide those small value transactions. And that has been the basis for Just Pay, Lanka QR, LPOP, a lot of other subsequent developments can come from CEFs, because it allows the real-time retail value transaction, right? Then we are, as we discussed last lecture, we are developing an open banking framework for third parties to connect to banks. And then regulation, right? We have the minimum compliance guideline for mobile applications. Then there's the draft Data Protection Act, which is now on its way to being passed. Central Bank initiated the Data Protection Act mainly because there were now with third parties coming in, There's also a lot of personal data. Now, this Data Protection Act is mainly focusing on personal data, right? So while banks have the secrecy policy, the third parties, the fintechs don't, right? They are not governed by the same secrecy laws. So this is why Data Protection Act was we initiated this, because now a lot of when customers are using third parties, then there must be some framework to protect their data. Of course, the Data Protection Act applies across the board for all industries, right? Not only banking. And then there is the Cyber Security Act and the Electronic Transactions Act. These are relatively old acts, but these have been, their presence have been very vital in the process of digitizing financial services, right? So those are the, any questions so far? Any questions? Okay. If there are no questions, so this lecture, now the lectures are all over, right? Let's come back at 11 and we'll go through what is going to come for the exam. The appearance so far, how has it been for you? I really have to gauge the how the course has been for you all when preparing the paper. What has it been easy to understand, difficult to understand, normal?
It's all easy to understand. I think it's normal kind of a thing. I
Okay.
think there are some new things I got to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And also, but anyway, in Sri Lanka, we are not practicing those things. We will, in future, we will come anyway.
Yeah.
But it's valid. It's valid for it.
Okay. Right. Thanks. Gayatri? Is Gayatri there?
Hello, ma'am.
Yes.
Yeah, I couldn't get your question.
The question was basically how the course was. Was it easy? Was it difficult? Was it sort of normal?
It's a little bit difficult because it's
Okay.
new to us.
Okay.
But however, you have explained them a very simple way. So I think it's very much useful for us.
Right. No, because no, it's very important. Thank you. It's just I just want to give you all this knowledge to know what is going on, but not to overload you all with so much information, because as you all might have noticed, it's a little broader than what you might have originally expected when the topic said digital payments and fintech. It's a very vast area. So this is actually what most all of this work, right? Even what you not the banks don't look at the moment, we are looking at it at the central bank, like artificial intelligence, machine learning. The banks are there, your IT groups are also looking at it, we are also looking at it, open banking, all of that. We are already, these are happening, right? So at policy level, these are taking place. So it's not these are not things that are completely outside and like we are reading Arthur C. Clarke or something like that. It's not that. This is actually right now the central bank is looking at all of these things. So the chances of them getting implemented is fairly fast, right? So that's why we need to grasp these things. Of course, we are also always learning at the bank. So these are all things we also learned, right? Because when we did our degrees or anything like that, these things weren't there, right? So we are also learning these afresh, and we want the bankers also to have a good idea, because without the bankers knowing it, no point only us knowing it. So it's very important that bankers need to know this. That's why we decided to introduce this course to the IBSL as well. The IBSL also wanted this kind of course to be included to talk about new things that are taking place in the industry, right? So the exam, what I'll do is, right, I don't have a model paper for you simply because this is the first time that this this course is taking place, right? So there is no sort of past paper, no sort of tested paper. So if I'm going to give you a model paper, it should be a sort of a tried and tested paper where I have where we can see results, right? Not just a sample paper, but it must be a paper where where we know that the response is also good. So there is no model paper like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you I'm going to go through all the lectures quickly, right? And highlight some of the areas. And when we are doing that, you all can also ask any questions that you all have, right? And make any clarifications. And I can, at that, when we are going through each lecture, please discuss with me, then I can gauge what is your level of knowledge, right? Because if your level of knowledge is 80, I don't want to ask you questions of 40. But if your level of knowledge is 40, there is no point in my asking 80 level questions as well. So it's very important that we strike a good balance where you can perform well and the exam is interesting for you as well, right? So there is part of exams. Now I like writing exams. I have written many exams, but I enjoy writing exams because when the questions are interesting, it's interesting to write, right? Right. So basic outline of the. Let me just present this. Have your other courses also given you model papers?
Yes, madam. For other subjects, we had past papers.
Right, yeah, that's the thing. You have past papers. I actually asked IBSL about it, and then they said that this is the issue, that because this is the first time you all don't have it. But of course, because you all are the first time, it is we are all working our way, so don't worry about it, right? So you have 5 questions out of 8, and so 20 marks each. So each question, the way I generally set my papers, now in the past IBSL exams as well that I have done, there are some past for the, not for yours, what was that level called? Was it the certificate course? I think more junior staff than you. Can't remember. Oh dear. So what I generally do, so if you want those those papers, those questions are there. That was as a part of the legal aspects. It was a part of another course, so how I generally set my questions is I set them in sections so that it is easy for you to score, right? And also it is easy for me to understand your knowledge, right? Let me just see if I have those questions here with me, then it will be easy for you. Unfortunately, I don't have those questions here. But basically, the structure is kind of like, so the way I do the questions is, so the first, because you're pass, so it's a 3-hour exam, right? So your pass mark is 51, as you know. So I structured in a way so that everyone can try to get 51, right? So that's the whole point of breaking down the subsections. You should be able to get around 50, over 50, by if you study the slides itself, right? If you study the slides itself, you should be able to score close to more than 50, right? If you really study the slides itself. The others, based on our discussions and based on your analytical skills and expression, right? So generally the questions will be something like one 8-mark question and then other smaller questions breaking the rest of the marks down, rest of the 12 marks down, right? So that is so it's fair. So if people have been listening, if people are not great at memorizing, then they also have a fair chance. If you want to just read the slides and understand, then you also have a chance, right? So either ways, and if you can do both well, then you can get a higher mark. It's as simple as that, right? I have found in the previous questions, generally, most students can answer very well. Some students, sometimes they get it mixed up. So these are because there are a lot of subsection, there are a lot of diagrams and systems and all of that. Make sure you practice those, right? Practice those, what are those structures, and there are several diagrams. So practice those, it will just make it easier for you to remember, right? So let's just go to the slides and I'll just quickly tell you like areas that you can focus on, right? So in the course structure, we had the concepts, evolution, institutional framework, legal framework, payment systems, settlement systems. And so settlement systems, I didn't go into great detail, right? We only discussed one settlement system, right? We didn't go to discuss other settlement systems. Then fintech, we did 3 lectures on 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, so 4 lectures on fintech. So the 8 will be divided on this ratio, right? So 6:4 ratio, that will be reflected in your 8 questions, right? Because as much, so what I felt in this course was you all are more comfortable with the payments section, like the top section. You all are more comfortable because these are the areas that you work with. You're not so comfortable with the fintech area. I sense that as well. But nevertheless, this is the real point of this course, the second section, right? So the second section and then the digital payment innovations. So therefore we can't leave those out, right? So you will have to put in a bit more work, but I will make those questions as straightforward as possible, right? Right. So now things like this, I'm not going to ask because these are very basic introductory things, right? Concepts, I won't ask very simple concepts like payment, what is a payment and all of that, but I may ask you to describe one of these connected with a process, right? Like a payment process, right? And then again, this sort of thing, it's good to remember these because generally these are sort of straightforward questions that can be asked where you can easily get marks if you get all the details correctly, right? Now, this sort of thing, it's good to remember major trends because this course is about the trends, right? So you can easily, now everything is written here, so you can easily remember those, right? That is lecture 1. Okay. So lecture 2, we discussed the evolution, right? So in the evolution, I won't be asking you these level of details. Perhaps they might come into the discussion level question, right? But not so much, right? So this sort of thing is important to know because this is the change that has been going on in payments, right? Mm, uh, Payment instruments, remember the payment instruments because we are doing retail payments, so payment instruments play a big role. So understanding how payment instruments work is what the payment instruments are and how they work is important, right? And then the next one that I want you all to remember is these in the subsequent ones lectures also have this, the debit card credit card process, right? I know many of you know it with diagram. Remember that, right? And then the new initiatives that we're having, the NCS, right? How do these differ from the traditional cards, right? If you all have any questions, just if you can't remember or anything like that, feel free to ask. And now we come to the more innovative areas, which is the mobile apps and QR code and all of that. Now, those also, please remember, like the features and the benefits and all of that, right? And what Sri Lanka's initiatives are, right? And the features of now, if you take Lanka QR, what are the features of Lanka QR and how does it get promoted, right? I will focus more on these newer areas, even within payment systems, right? Now, these we have discussion points. So these sort of questions, not these questions exactly, but these are the sort of questions that will come for the higher scoring question, right? Or the higher scoring questions uh, will have more questions like this, right? Okay, any questions in lecture 2? Any questions in lecture 2? No? Okay. Okay, so institutional framework. Again, remember the actors in the institutional framework. We go into the role of banks quite a bit, right? And in the institutional framework, try to remember the cross relationship between the different institutions, right? And then the key roles of the central bank and the banks, right? We've gone into some detail here, right? The actors like this, remember these, right? And also remember the features of the payment systems, right? So the key features and what they do. This is also connected to the diagram we saw in the previous um, lecture slides, right? So these are all pretty straightforward. Up to these are y'all are very familiar with these areas, but please read them because there will be information that you are not, though you know what the central bank does. What is if I will be looking, but when I will be looking at what is here, right? In these, it's not because when you say what is the role of the central bank, you can write many things. But I want in light of this course, right? So what is here? I will first go to these slides, and then only other things I will mark. This is for your benefit as well, so that you have some structure, right? The more discussion question you can answer outside because there everything I say is not in the slides. As you know, I explain a lot, so you can have discussions in the but in those questions, but where specifics are asked, you can very easily answer from here. But for these can be discussion questions as well, right? So legal framework. Legal framework is for the legal framework. These are I would recommend you look at this because it's fairly straightforward, right? So remember what are in these slides, and this there are slides. So these you don't need to now when you are remembering these things, you don't need to remember these entire sections, right? Now this at a higher level, these will cover, right? So when this is more for your information. You don't need to, yes, 62A, it's good to remember, but you don't need to write this whole slide, right? What is in 62A is sufficient, right? Or 98. These are the main things for clearance and settlement, right? Now, because you are a more senior bankers and it's a 3-hour paper, questions like, okay, under which section allows central bank to facilitate clearance transactions, right? So it's very straightforward. Section 98, right? And then you can say what it and how it happens, right? Through the deposit reserves maintained in the commercial banks, right? So that's sort of very simple. What does Article 12B provide, right? So how is under which section of the Monetary Law Act is Lanka Clear set up? So Article 112B, right, which allows the central bank to delegate its functions to a body corporate, that sort of thing. And then they have the PSSA as well. So the MLA and the PSSA. So this one, remember this and these functions, right? Now this sort of, I won't ask questions like this. Not because they are not relevant, but I may ask like what is a payment system? But definitions, word for word definitions, I won't ask because I think your need is a different requirement, right? Now this one, it's good to know, but you don't need to remember because this is a lower level of circulars, right? So you don't need to remember this level, right? These are the main things that we have discussed. We have discussed this regulation, we have discussed this guideline, right? But these we haven't discussed because they're general directions and circulars, because there are more sub levels of regulation, right? So this is what these are here, right? The important ones I have discussed. So the important directions have been discussed, right? Asela,
Yes, madam.
your presentation, I wanted a copy of it. Will you be able to email it to me?
I already shared it. Kalinga, I will also share it to you.
Right, I didn't get it. If you can just send it directly to me, my email address
Sure.
is kanchanai@cbsf.
Sure, definitely.
Thanks. So I won't ask you questions like this, right? Though we discussed this point, I won't ask you questions like this because it's sort of future and it's very difficult to mark you on this. I won't ask you sort of futuristic questions. I can ask you for your recommendations, but I won't ask you like what new, because that sort of thing will be very difficult for me to also mark you on, because you all will have such varied uh, uh, ideas. Okay, any questions so far? I'm just pointing out the key areas and pointing out areas that I can sort of tell you that I won't be asking at exam level, right? Right. Then, okay, we are, what is this fifth one? We are still continuing. Right. So we are continuing, right, the rest of the acts. So in this, you should focus, you don't need to focus a lot on things like banking act, because I think it gets covered in other courses. These are mostly for your knowledge. Maybe you will get to list them out like at this level and give a very short description of them, but you won't be required to give very long descriptions of these, because they are not directly related to payments and settlements, and often they get they get covered in other courses, right? You might want to look at this one, the Data Protection Act, right? Because this is directly connected to fintech, and the main reason that we initiated this was for fintech and the digital payments that are coming up. So you may want to look at this, the definitions of what is personal data, right? Who is a data subject, who is an identifiable person, right? This level, at a high level, I might ask, but I don't think I will go to that level. But if you can, I just want you to know what the Data Protection Act is there for and what its purpose is, right? And the GDPR principles of data protection, like the lawfulness, purpose limitation, data minimization, that aspects. Because the reason I would like to question on that area is because this changes the way we think, right? In Sri Lanka, in many countries, we don't give enough value to personal data, and as a reason, we collect all amounts of data. We keep it forever. Or the only reason we might destroy data is because it's costly to store them, right? Not because of any other reason. But actually, we can't, under the new GDPR rules, we can't store them unless we have a purpose, right? So in that sense, we have to get these concept internalized, right? And that's the reason I would like to just bring these out, so that our industry is more in sync with the new ideas and the new practices in the world, right? Which we all are now coming in line with, right? So these are the rights of the data subject, right? Then you have virtual currencies. We have a newer press release. Let me just find that for you. And where is that? Right, so this is the newer version of that press release, right? So let me just share this with you. Right, so this is the newer version of the press release, and also the foreign exchange department, they released this one, and us both together we released that press release, but it's based on this direction of the foreign exchange department, right? And here they give a definition of virtual currencies, right? Right. So this is the definition of the virtual currencies and the relevant new. I might just put this here and send you, and you can update your knowledge on it. Right. So what it did, what this exchange control direction did was it gave, so far we, central bank had not given a definition for virtual currencies, right? But with this direction, we have given a definition to virtual currencies, and it is the digital representation of value that can be digitally traded and functions as a medium of exchange and or unit of account and or store of value, but does not have legal tender status in any jurisdiction and is not issued or guaranteed by any jurisdiction. Now, can someone tell me what is the difference between a virtual currency and a normal currency, and a normal e-money or a digital, like a central bank issued digital currency and a virtual currency? What is the distinction?
There's no custodian or final responsible person.
Yes, that is correct. And the key word, Asela, is legal tender status, right? It is not legal tender issued by that jurisdiction, by that country.
Yeah.
Right? It can be it can be issued by other people, but it is not issued by, now if the virtual currency is issued, if the digital currency is issued by the central bank or the monetary authority, then the term that is used is central bank digital currency, right? Here the difference is it's called virtual currency, right? It's just like a generic term. If it is issued by a jurisdiction, it's called central bank CBDCs, right? Digital currencies. CBDC. And certain countries are looking at that, right? I will send this as an update to which was that. Chapter 5, no? So this is, sorry, lesson 5. I will send this as an update to lecture 5. Right? Because when we had the lecture, we didn't have this press release or the regulation, right? So it's very new. Right, so that's 5, then 6. Okay, we are looking at payment and settlement systems, right? Now this is an area that you all are familiar with and you all can, I think, easily remember. So this one, remember this structure, right? And then what each payment system does, right? And then things for like this, like reasons for using RTGS. Why, as a manager, you would be able to select why you would choose one system against another, right? Again, not this Lanka Pay architecture, but remember what are the components of the retail payment architecture, right? In this, given that we are talking about fintech, the focus will be there will be more questions regarding things like CEFs, right? And what CEFs can do, right? Six, then 7. Okay, now we are coming into the fintech ones, right? So far, any questions about the others? Any questions about the others? Okay, no questions. Right. So this one also you will get about 3 questions, 2 to 3 questions on this area, right? Most probably 3, right? So this one it will be mixed so that you have some straightforward questions that you can answer directly from the course, from the slides, right? Now, things like this, I want you all to remember the traditional way of doing it, and then what happens when Fintech comes in, right? Where does the change happen, right? Now, if you take this, we have the internet payment. Traditionally, it happened with the payment gateway. Now, there's a payment service provider in the middle, right? Now, where is the Fintech taking place, right? What is the distinction? What are we calling Fintech here? Right? This new layer. What is this new layer? Right? And then these are basically, I didn't go into very much detail, but these are sort of, it could be a very simple question that I could ask, right? Right. Now this one is the more theory, question, the presentation that I had. I I would like to ask some questions on it, but since you all participated in this lecture, how was it for you? Was it difficult? Was it hard? Simple?
Payment system and all that, since we are dealing on day-to-day basis, that was quite okay. But these things are new trends. Yes, all these will only learning that we are not exposed to practice this much at branch level.
Yes. So it's that's the thing. So you will need to really study this, right? I think the first ones you will have natural some, so you have now acquired some knowledge on your own, right? Now, if I ask you to draw the credit card payment process, you can just draw it probably. But these things are the new things that you have to learn, right? So I would still, that's the thing. Though I know that for your passing purposes, the questions on the payment section is easier, but for your knowledge purposes, this side is important, right? So you will need to uh, I I didn't, as I was going in the lecture, I actually adjusted my original plan because I felt without giving out too much of many different things to try and keep it limited so that you all can study these better without going into the very wide area, because fintech is very wide, right? So things like this, please remember, right? And what is disruptive innovation, right? And the whole point of disruptive innovation is that the new entrants target to meet the low end needs, right? Now this is the key point of the fintechs. I keep saying this. They are targeting the peripheries. They are targeting the underserved customers. They are targeting underserved services, right? And they're coming up with services that were not there before, not given by banks before, simply because technology didn't allow it, and for banks to give it on a manual level was too much work, right? Because you already have a lot of work. But with technology, someone else can provide that service. So there are all these new services that are coming from the lower ends and reaching up, and then they can disrupt the banking industry, right? Because as they, with time, they get more experience, they get better, then the bank customers, right, will go to those services and use the bank less. That is the point when the disruption happens. The moment the mainstream customers of the incumbents, that is the banks, leave to go to the new person, that is where the disruption occurs, right? So that is very important to remember in this disruptive model, right? Then, so these, remember these words. This is, I have explained disruptive innovation in its most basic form, right? Not in the more complicated way of, subsequent research and all. This is the sort of the seminal work. Christensen is the person who came up with this word disruptive innovation, and I have left it at the bare minimum so that you know, and I want you to understand the correct terms, right? When you move out of branch level, or when you go to sometimes conferences or something, you will find people saying disruptive innovation, disruptive. But actually, it's not disruptive innovation. It could be a radical innovation. It could be a architectural innovation, routine innovation. It might not be disruptive, right? But you have to be able to understand what a disruptive innovation is, simply because you must be able to identify a disruptive innovation when it's happening and take preemptive actions, like the banks can acquire, the banks can also respond by coming up with their own. Whatever it is, you must be able to identify what it is, right? Because in fintechs, most of the fintechs fall under disruptive innovation, right? So this whole thing, study it well, right? Then 8, we are further. No, this is the same thing we did. What is this? Here. Right. So this one again, I kept this really simple, this lecture also, so that you all are very focused on these three. So open banking, digital banks, challenger banks. This is fairly straightforward when you read them, but remember the distinction. What is open banking? Open banking is not a bank that is open, like physically. It is a bank that is open via APIs to third parties, right? Through sharing data, right? Financial data, right? This consumer transaction and other financial data, right? That is the key defining point of what open banking is. So it's very important to distinguish this, right? And also this, the basis of open banking is EU PSD2, right? Then just remember these diagrams. I think this is a simpler diagram to explain what the difference between banking with and without open banking, right? Because it's not that banking already doesn't have APIs or internet banking. They have all of that. But what a open API does is it integrates those systems into a single interface, right? That is difference. And from here, so many, not only one fintech app, many fintech apps can join, and the customer, all these customers, any customer can have multiple types of services that the bank traditionally does not offer, right? So these you can remember. And then, of course, what Sri Lanka is doing about it, right? Then effect on banks. Then you should be able to distinguish between what is a digital bank and a bank with internet banking, right? A digital bank is a bank that is purely online, right? So you must distinguish it from internet banking, right? And that it has different licensing requirements in different countries, right? So then you have digital banks, challenger banks versus traditional banks. So then we have to distinguish what are these different things, right? Now, challenger banks, as I said, these are all terms. There's challenger banks, neo banks, digital banks. Those different things are different. Are some not different meanings. The different terms have very similar meanings and sometimes are used for the same thing, right? So we have to know when we are using what is now the reason. Now challenger banks, people use challenger banks very loosely nowadays, but actually the basis of challenger banks is something completely different, right? If you ask a normal person who is involved in fintech, they won't say challenger banks are the banks that challenge the established UK banks, such as Barclays, Lloyds, HSBC, NatWest. They won't say that. They will say it is banks that are challenging the incumbent, right? Now that is not really what the challenger banks originally were for, right? But now they use it for that term as well, right? So challenger banks are not necessarily digital banks. They can be digital or semi-digital, right? Because what was originally claimed as challenger banks were new banks who were able to break into a very closed industry, right? So you have what the traditional bank's response is as well, right? That is that. Finally, we have today's lecture. So again, we come back to this. Sorry, I think I missed one. Is it this? Yes, sorry, I missed this one. This is also important, right? So on part 1. So these, you have to remember these, right? The types of fintech, right? Just you should be able to just say, okay, what are the types of fintechs and what does that each mean, right? What does crowdfunding mean? What does because it's just because if you go to the detail, it's very large, right? So to what extent can you describe these concepts, right? Crowdfunding, crowd lending, robo advisory, right? So to what extent you can describe these, right? So yeah, I think we've covered all. And this one is the one we did today. So same goes for these. For these, of course, I won't go into like great detail, but again, what I will want to know is whether you know the concept at a basic level and how they get applied in banking, right? Blockchain, again, same thing, right? Promoting fintech, that is important, and of course the initiatives in Sri Lanka, right? These are also these things that you all have already studied in the previous lectures, so these are also there. Okay, so I think we've covered everything, so you will have to read and learn yourself. Any questions so far? So the structure, the questions will generally be like this, okay. Name the retail payment infrastructures of Sri Lanka. So then you name them, right? Describe two. Okay, so then you describe two. And then the third question could be how select any of these and show how they support fintech innovation, right? or to increase digital payments in Sri Lanka, right? Something like that. So that's basically the way the questions will be structured, where you will get some space to discuss aspects in the final question. Okay. Gayatri, any questions?
No.
Okay, so all clear. I will expect 100 out of 100 from you. Daparan?
No questions. I'm okay.
Okay, Asela?
No questions, but if you can ask to schedule this as our first exam, because most of the other, subjects that we have done also pending. Now that we have the most recent knowledge on this subject, we can have this one first.
You can freshly go and
Yes.
give everything, no? Because you all have participated in the lecture as well. Yeah, I can definitely ask. I think they are
Yeah.
waiting
I will
for.
also raise this with Kalinga.
Right. I think they are waiting for these lockdown issues and all of that to end, because I think they need to keep the exam physically. You all need to physically come there to have the exam. So I asked Ms. Kotakanda, so it's still not scheduled, but I have already started making the paper, so it's not a problem on my side. Any time is okay for me. So it's I'll also tell them. It will be better for you also, I think. And I think a lot of newer concepts, right? Probably the others are. What are the other subjects?
We did on the legal environment.
Managing people.
Managing people.
Okay. Okay, like econ and did you all do those as well?
Yes, econ also involved in some.
Okay, right. So I think, and also this might be sort of structurally also kind of different, because you're learning a lot of concepts, new concepts and things. So yes, I will definitely ask that. So if you have any questions in the meantime, feel free to email me. My phone number is 2398-596. That's my bank number. It directly connects to my phone as well.
Can you tell me?
Yeah. 2398
Okay.
596.
Okay, thanks.
So if you have any questions when you're revising, you can call me. Even those who are not here but listening to the recording, if they want to call me, they're perfectly welcome to do so. And yeah, so just if there's anything unclear, just always ask, because uh, this is not my target for this course is not for you all to only pass the exam, right? Because these are real things that are going on in the environment, and you will, there is a good chance it will happen during your time at the banks. And if you all get transferred or moved around, or new systems coming in, if you all are asked to propose new changes, you all can look at these and see, okay, where is the trend going? We are looking at retail level, we are looking at the customer, we are looking at giving new services through technology. So from that angle, you can practically apply these things to see where things are changing, right? Your customer is changing, the services are changing, the tools that you have are also changing. So that is really what I want to give it to you, not only for you to just pass the exam, but so that you can apply it and take it forward. Because for us as central bankers, we want the banks to have the most up-to-date knowledge, the bankers to be in the forefront of it. We don't want, so that when the customers come to them with innovations and all of that, the bankers already know what. So sometimes customers will come directly to the branch and give proposals. Then, or sometimes when you're in compliance, the proposals will come to you to be checked. So in that case, these concepts should not be new to you. You must already be experts in them so that you can guide the customer and not the other way around. So it's with that purpose, this is a sort of introductory level that we started this. So that's the main purpose. And of course the exam, I will balance it out so that everyone has a fair chance of passing. So please prepare. I have given you some areas, highlighted some areas which I think will be more important. So please look at those as well, right? Okay, so thank you very much. I think we can close today. I want to thank you all. You all have been there from the beginning. So I really want to thank the three of you, and there were a few others who came as well, because it's really important to have students participating in online courses, because as lecturers, it's one of our biggest challenges for us when we are teaching. Otherwise, it's like doing a YouTube channel or something. We don't know what the student, whether they understand or where they are going, because we can't see the faces, we don't know what's happening. So I really want to thank you all for joining all these days and asking questions and participating. It was very helpful. And I think to others who are not joining but listening to the recordings, that will be helpful for them also, your contribution, because you would have asked questions that they had. So thank you very much. So good luck for the exam. If you have any questions, just email me or call me. It's not a problem. Okay? Right. Thank you.